I think we're going to have everything, every scrap of knowledge about what is a podcast that works. So then we'll have a Q&A after your speeches, and then we'll look at how we can combat environmental injustice. So my name is, Ramsey is the founder and CEO of SOWT. It's a foundation, a not-for-profit. Its head office is in Jordan. It produces podcasts of interest to the Arabic world in Arabic or in the various Arabic dialects. This was established in 2016 when podcasts were emerging simply. Podcast being a tool to reach a broad audience. In 2014, we saw the beginning of series and big American productions. And then podcasts became well known to everybody. So we established this foundation that produces podcasts. We were trailblazers in the Arab-speaking world across the internet through Hebra, a not-for-profit, in Jordan as well. Hence our idea in 2016 to embark on this podcast approach. Thanks very much, Malik. Thanks to CFI as well. Thank you for making this encounter possible. So back in 2015, I started thinking about potential for producing content. How could we produce a voice-based audio content for the Arab-speaking world? Now, in line with many, I started looking at what podcasts were. But prior to Serial, in 2014, it was of particular interest, the podcast format. It's now become very well known, something which is very, very well known, it must be said, and people talked about podcasts considerably, which prompted me to say in the day that we had to produce content, podcast-based content in Arabic. So I launched things in 2015. I started launching a program. And I saw that I wasn't alone in doing so. I started working with other people who had the same objective as me. And then little by little, we reached a conclusion that we wanted to produce audio content in Arabic for the Arab-speaking world. That's the starting point for the whole idea. You may be familiar with my own story. I grew up in the US, and in those days there was the NPR, National Public Radio is the acronym, the idea of which was that really radio is a must. And when I turned up in Jordan in 2006, it was very palpable that radio was a very important media channel. So I said to myself, all right, well, how can we move from radio to podcasts? And that's how things began flourishing, in terms of my idea. So you started producing content. It's of excellent quality and echoes right across the Arab-speaking world, despite dialectical differences. I mean, these dialects are understood right across the Arabic world, but there's Haib or Domtep. That may ring a bell. Perhaps you can tell us more. This was the type of content that you produced and broadcast over SOWT. And how did you choose your first topics? Because I think it was forbidden. Arib, forbidden. That was the title of your initial podcast that talked about societal problems. That was very bold. So can you tell us how that started? Yes, well, we started by really trying to look at what was currently out there podcast-wise in Arabic language. Now, there was one outfit at the time that was generating this content, producing about 50 or 60 podcasts. And obviously we're hunting around for topics and matters to address. And so we also had to make sure that that the topics fitted with our SOWT approach. And we wanted to address things that hadn't yet been touched upon and that could raise interest, but hadn't yet been addressed. So that was our starting point. We talked about gender issues, and when we talked about this, we were told, no, this is taboo. This is not something you can talk about. It's forbidden, they said. And if you've lived in an Arab-speaking world, you'll know that it's a word on everybody's lips. It's forbidden. You know, everything's taboo. So my colleague and myself, or a colleague with whom I was working on this, we said to ourselves, right, let's call our program Forbidden. I mean, forbidden in Arabic can be translated in various ways, like shame or taboo, as well as forbidden. There are three semantic prongs to it, if you like. So this Haib, or forbidden, program rested on topics that are difficult to talk about in a video or in an article. And we could feel that it was all emotionally charged, talking about these things. Somebody might talk about something that was highly personal. And a topic broached in front of a camera could have an impact on the person actually telling his or her story. It could have a rebound effect, if you like. So it was much more straightforward to talk about these topics through the podcast. Last year, we worked on a topic. This involved a person who stuttered. It was a problem for the person. But this person's story was very important for that person wanted to get across his or her own story. And even without giving a name to the program, the audience understood what this person's story was all about. So this is the type of topic that we talk about in our podcast. Podcast talks about history, sport, politics, art. And that was our second program. In fact, we've produced 10 in all, with 120 episodes in total. So this met with a huge success. And the Arabic world met the podcast and met topics that weren't addressed normally in the Arabic-speaking world, and therefore the podcast imported from Europe, but addressing local points, societal points that were, in inverted commas, taboo, and which saw your program emerge. Hearing from people who are grappling with these societal issues on a daily basis. Do you think it's that gave impetus to Haib, your podcast platform in the Arab world? We're really in the vanguard of Arab-speaking, Arab language podcast production, yeah? Arab language, I point that out. Because there are many podcasts that are produced, but they're not in Arabic. So for us, we really wanted to produce something that came from the Arab world, and it was designed for the Arab world. Now, that was very, very important for us. That's the first point. The second point is that most programs that we produce are built on a dialogue format, a conversational format. That's very important. It's a debate, it's a dialogue, it's a discussion. So right from the outset, our focus is that, a debate, a conversation. We look at history, and we weren't shy about talking about topics that could be perceived as taboo subjects. We focused on the narrative, the story that's offered, and then we turn in the second phase to the debate. So that's the profile of our podcast. We're going to be celebrating our 7th anniversary with dozens and hundreds of episodes. Our team has been fleshed out. You're a foundation now, though, aren't you? So how did you go about doing things? How did you grow a foundation, manage the foundation, and find the resources, the financial resources, as well as human resources, to get to that level of professionalism and to cement your organization in the media landscape? Well, obviously, we put our foot wrong initially, and whenever we got it wrong, I saw the silver lining. It was an opportunity. Like many not-for-profits, like many foundations, you get it wrong, but you learn from those mistakes. You pick yourself up and learn, and so we got bigger, little by little, as the years came and went. I think we have 27 full-time employees, if I've got the numbers right. Now, we've grown over the years, but we're not at the project level phase now. We've got responsibilities, we've got payroll. So, that's great. The bigger we get, obviously things become much more difficult. But we started thanks to the donations. And then we had internal financial resources. We hooked up with other companies. In 2022, we did that. And this weighs in for almost 2/3 of our budget. That's very positive, but it can be an open door to other problems. People making these donations are financiers, or past or present. They've seen our business grow, and so they might wonder, well, why should we carry on funding you, they might say. So profitability is important to sustain or to make us viable, but we also need it preserves or safeguards our diversity. If you just have if you're locked in to one source of funding, if you're tied up with one financier, well, it's a Damocles sword, isn't it? It's dangerous. So the more you diversify your resources, the better it is, really. Now, our generation was familiar with bloggers, and SOWT has become, an institution. You have a payroll of 27 with dozens or so stakeholders. SOWT now goes beyond Jordan's borders. It's got an office in Dubai, and in the independent media world, it's not something you see every day. So how is that the case? Funding? Or what's your objective with funding structure and content creation? There's Finia Media. Its head office is in Dubai. And what's great, I suppose, what springs to mind first, is that it's an independent company. It's bought up other foundations, it's bought up other companies, and they produce fiction-based podcasts with fiction content. But at the end of the day, so that we can have more reach, more impact in the Arab-speaking world, we had to reach a broad public, broader than the fiction content world. So we had to diversify our program and reach fresh audience segments or target an entirely new audience. So that's why very quickly we could find our feet. We worked with institutions like MDIF, because it was important to make the acquisition. This is important for us. It may be the world first, in the Arab-speaking world at least. And I thought it was very important, basically. So you bought that company. What's the impact on content creation? What is a successful podcast? The successful content? What's the recipe? What's the magic recipe, if you like? Well, to make a podcast successful, what do you need? Like with any other type of content, you need to make sure that it's high value, the podcast. Or maybe it's a fresh angle in your podcast. And you've also got to have a clear understanding of your audience and that they need to understand what you're trying to do with the podcast. Because often as journalists, you say, I know what I want to say, and I know what people need to know. Well, that's all very well. But with internet and with social media, in actual fact, the communication process rebounds off many walls. So it's important that there should be some sort of conversation between those involved in the entire process.
For us, the content that we make is close to the man in the street or the woman in the street. And at the same time, it's in line with our journalistic ethics. And that's a very important point for us. We can have either fiction or certain musical comedies or historical content, whatever it is. But it's all about ethics. So to sum up, what you're saying, your ingredients for success, you've got the means and the resources in your institution. And you are very close to society and to what's happening out there on the ground. So you're very close to the ordinary citizens, and you really wish to understand the lives of ordinary people. So I hope that you're really going to practice what you're saying, and I hope you will tell us that if it's a success for you or not. And so now you're open to questions, please. We've got all the ingredients of this recipe, of this miracle recipe, and maybe you'd like to find out more about it. Anyone for questions? Yes, sorry. I'm a journalist from France 4. I have two questions to ask you, if you don't mind. The Arab world. And its culture. Must have some kind of content which is very different, different from what you have from the US. So for us in the Arab world, it's very different. Now, since you work with the grassroots and with the population at its base, so how do you attract them? How do you get them to watch and listen? Especially in your programs. Does the environment have an impact on you, the environment in which you're working? Thanks very much. Thanks very much for asking this question. I don't quite agree with your first question, that is, in the last 10 years. Since you've been literally globetrotting in the various areas of the world, and that you don't have many members listening in to you. But with internet and with people now subscribing, there are more and more of them, more and more subscribers, and that's important. As a result, I think there are others who don't want to pay for the subscription. People feel that they can just put their names down and only pay for Netflix, but not for us. But the other countries like Egypt, where it's very different. But people tend to, want to listen to things which are very important, and then they want to subscribe for that. Our aim, however, is not to make money. That's not the reason why we are there. As I had said, we have production, yes, that we get paid for, and at the same time we receive donations and gifts, and there's advertising as well, which is a source of revenue, plus there's membership. But in terms of volumes, it's the subscriptions and so on which are the smallest, contributors to our income stream. That was a very quick answer to your second question. I think people feel that there are too many podcasts, but I feel that's very positive because the more content you have in podcasts of a certain quality, it's useful for us. YouTube and others have channels. Do they have super production? They often wonder, is the quality good enough? But for us, it's quite the opposite. It really does help us to have a better production. Let me, while waiting for the mic, just have this lady come in.
My name is Amalia Oganjanyan, DW Academy. So we work on the podcast projects in Ukraine. And we realized that there is difference between audio and video podcasts because you mentioned that for the taboo topics, it's easier to use audio because it's easier to discuss. But we saw in Ukraine, for example, that we receive more audience in video podcasts because people still want to see, even just to see people discussing something. What is your experience? Thank you.
بجاوب بالعربي. شكرا على السؤال.
Well, thanks for asking the question. Well, ever since we set up shop in 2016, our foundation that is, this question did arise. We are called SOWT, which means the voice. And in 2016, if you go back to our founding date, you'd remember everything was on video. Everything was on video. As a result, there were quite a few other production units that went bankrupt. I wouldn't say that video or audio is better than the other. Each one has its own importance. Each one has its own value for each one of them. And my impression is sometimes it's far more important to use videos. It's easier, it's better than to use audio. For instance, on YouTube. YouTube is one of the biggest platforms for podcasts, and everyone knows that. It does exist. On YouTube, there's all sorts of stuff on YouTube, but we like to concentrate on voice, on audio. We can create audio, and we really use the voice, if you like, or the audio on video. These programs are like a narrative, and so it's much easier to make videos through this kind of narrative. That's true. That's true. It is difficult for narratives to work on the basis of audio. So you have these live sessions, live productions, and those are much easier to make. Yes, we did experiment quite a bit. We dabbled around and we invited people who were, frontline, if you like, with the public and straight in touch with them. Then they said that they loved everything that we did. So this gives us an entry point, if you like. Thank you very much.
My name is Boris Karlov Batata. I am from Cameroon. I want to find out from you, when you started your podcasting, did you for once ever feel like you should give up? So in broader sense, what I'm asking is, if I'm to go to start a podcast now, what are the possible challenges that I will face and how can I overcome these challenges?
ممكن برد بشكل عام.
Well, I'll just give you a general picture on that then. I feel that each time it's going to be far more difficult. All the work that you have to do, and what's more, contents are now shrinking. But there's several opportunities that do arise. Firstly, you have to be fully aware of what your aims are. Is it just to make money? Or is it to, connect and bring together data and information which is important and work as journalists with an impact on our society? Of course, there are obstacles and challenges that we run into all the time, but society is very much there. And there's Malek sitting right next to me. We've known each other for a long time, and we talk very openly and sincerely about these subjects, both as friends and as colleagues, as it so happens. We are in touch with several organizations like Serafi. So there's a community. Well, 15 years ago, we would have concentrated on the communities who can help you. Each one has its own special points, its own role to play, and each one may feel that this media is a bit too overcharged or overloaded, so help can be provided from the outside. And I always expect people to help me out. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing with us. Unfortunately, there are not many secrets that we can really share. We can't really expect to have a magic recipe. It seems to me that it's really listening to others and drawing lessons from that and taking advantage of all that. So thanks very much for this experience with others. Let's give them a hand. I think they really deserve it.